Hello, editing Liselle again. So, if you were with me last week for the first part of the Q&A, I'll link it over here. You'll know that the video was really, really long and I didn't realize. And so I split it into parts. And so now you are watching part 2 of 2. So I'll go ahead and let you get started with that. If not Canada, where would you live? This is a fun one. I know. So I would 100% live in London, England. That if I couldn't live in Canada for whatever reason. I actually would love to live there, but it's just like factors and job and like being far away family, I wouldn't, but it's great. I've really loved all the times that I've been there. The weather is so temperate, and I know like people in the UK are always like, oh, the weather, but I was like, it's so temperate compared to Canada. And I love so much of the food. I like know people who live there. I like listening to the accents. I think that's nice. And I just like, I had a good time there. And it's like very like Canada. I would continue to have universal health care. I would continue to have like, more affordable schooling. And I think they actually have a better repayment system than we have. So that's great. Yeah. So I think that would be where I would go if I wasn't going to be in Canada. I used to like wish that I could like go and like live in New York or California, but now I've like started to realize like I've started to think about the drawbacks of living in the States, and I have no interest in living in the States now. I think it would be nice to visit, like, post-COVID and stuff, to visit places in the States, but I don't think I would ever have a desire to live there. Yeah, I just like, some things I just like, I want to continue to have this, and universal healthcare is a big one, and just like other stuff. I think I would just prefer, I think I just wanted to live in a hot place, but like the UK is so mild, so I could totally do that. And then I like in the UK that you could like travel around to different places, not necessarily in England now because of Brexit and stuff, maybe, but yeah, that's the other place I would live if I couldn't live in Canada. How do you deal with negative feedback even if it comes from a good place? This is a great question, because even when you get feedback that is like useful and constructive, and even if it's still like, yeah, I don't really think this is working, you can get like a little stab in the heart. So often what I'll do is I will wait until all my feedback comes back. So if I say have, for example, 3 beta readers reading my book, I will wait until I get all 3 of their feedback back to look at any, so that I can like condense it into one session, and then I'll read through all the feedback. And then usually what I'll do is I'll take a break from it for the day. So I'll respond to the person to be like, right away, to be like, hey, I got your stuff, thanks so much, I'm gonna read through it later. I don't respond to them right away with any questions. I let it sit for a day. I let myself marinate in it. Sometimes I feel my feelings. Sometimes I get sad a little bit and I have to wallow and like watch a TV show or something. And just let yourself feel all those feelings. Take that day, and then sometimes take longer than a day, take several days, and then go back and look at the feedback again with like fresh eyes and see if you have any like legitimate questions about stuff, and see if you legitimately agree with that feedback or you don't. But to me, the big thing has been like, don't contact people right away or right after you've read the negative feedback, because chances are you're going to be too emotionally high strung and you could like ruin your CP relationship by being like overly defensive. And so better to take that time to marinate on it, to think about things and let yourself feel your feelings, and then you can like start to think about how to tackle those edits. What horror did you watch/read to prep for writing Butcherbirds? So this is an interesting question for me. So I have always been like a horror movie fan. I have always watched horror movies. My mom, when I was a baby, would take me to the movie theater with her to watch horror movies, and I would sleep through it. because yeah, so like, and my grandma did the same thing with my mom, like watched like horror movies when she was pregnant and watched horror movies with her when she was a baby. Like, we are just like this. And so I've grown up, I've always watched horror movies with my mom. I've always loved them. And so I've watched so many. But when I sat down to write Butcher Birds, I hadn't actually read like any horror. I had read one book that maybe I would consider horror, but I'm pretty sure it's shelved as like suspense thriller. It was The Three by Sarah Lotz, but I'm pretty sure that was like shelved as like a suspense thriller. It wasn't shelved as a horror. It just felt like a horror to me. So when I sat down to write Butcher Birds, I had not read any like horror books. Yeah, I just like had it. And I just like wrote it. I think I had read Wilder Girls and Sawkill Girls, which are like more genre bending, like horror, fantasy, that sort of thing. I think those were the only two I had read, but I hadn't read like Stephen King. I think I tried to read a Stephen King once and I just like didn't care for it, and I don't see myself reading any Stephen King in the future. I've watched a lot of the movie adaptations of Stephen King stuff and enjoyed it. I just don't see myself reading the books. I just like, meh. Basically. And so I'm more interested in just like reading new up and coming horror. So yeah, I hadn't really read any when I wrote Butcher Birds. I wrote it really from the perspective of like horror movies and like that sort of thing, and I just like wrote it. And then while I was editing and that sort of thing, that's when I had read a bunch of horror books. And now I've read like a ton, especially like of YA horror books that have come out in like the last 2 years. I've read a lot of those. So yeah, hadn't really done anything before that, besides like a huge like horror movie love and familiarity with the genre through movies. What's a food you passionately hate? This is kind of hard because I was like, yeah, but then I tried to think of something I passionately hated and I was like, nah. Here's the thing, I'm actually like quite a picky eater and I don't like creamy things. So I don't like, to me, like stuff like cream cheese is like so nasty. It's so gross. Like, it's so gross. And like, yeah, like, I just think it's gross. And I used to work at Tim Hortons because Canadian. And when we would like do orders with like cream cheese, and people want like half an inch thick of cream cheese, and I would think of just like biting into the bagel with like a half an inch of like just like cream cheese in your mouth like that. Oh my god, it's so nasty to me. It's so nasty. Like, I don't understand how people enjoy that. I think that's so gross. Yeah, I don't like a lot of creamy things and like sauces and like, yeah. What's your favorite thing about Park Jimin? So this is, if you are a fan of BTS, Jimin is my favorite BTS member. I like that his face is pretty. I think that's very nice. I also like that he's very passionate about like his work and his dancing, and like when you watch the documentaries and stuff, like there's one like he gets injured and he like he can't dance with the rest of them, and he's so like sad about it, and like just the like level of passion to have about your work like that. And he always like dances like full out, which I like because I like the dancing and I really like that. And he's funny. He's like very funny. He's always like joking with the guys. So yeah, that's why I am a Jimin stan. Is your favorite genre to write also your favorite one to read? And also, I'm just gonna pair these two together. How did you choose which genre to write in? So yes, these all go together. So my favorite genres to read are fantasy and horror, and so that's what I write. The only thing that's a little bit odd is like my debut, Blood Like Magic, is a mix of fantasy and sci-fi. And something I realized about myself is I actually haven't read a lot of contemporary sci-fi. Most of the sci-fi, like the young adult sci-fi that I've read, is actually ones that I read when I was younger, like in that big dystopian boom is like the Darkest Minds series and the Hunger Games. I didn't read Divergent, I watched the movies. And like the Chaos Walking series and Maze Runner, though James Dashner is problematic and horrible. But like those were all, that was all the sci-fi that I loved. And then like what other, and then like adult science fantasy that I've read. So like The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin and that sort of thing. And so that's the only kind of interesting part. And I wonder sometimes if that's why I don't write full science fiction books, why I end up writing kind of the mashup bit, is because I don't read as much contemporary sci-fi, which I should. I just, for whatever reason, haven't in the last few years. I don't really know why. But yes, so I primarily read young adult fantasy and horror, and so that's why I write in those genres. Though again, as I said in another question before, I actually hadn't really read young adult horror when I started writing my horror, but I watched a lot of horror movies. So I find that I tend to choose genres that I am consuming the most because I'm the most familiar with them, but also I'm the most interested and passionate about them. Like that's why I'm reading that, because I really like it, so that's what I tend to write. So that's kind of how I chose genres. Do you ever hate your writing so much you question if you can write another book? I don't. So I think what happens sometimes is almost like the opposite. Like I'll get really proud of my book and then I'll panic about whether I can recreate that again, because I'm like, oh, but I already did that. Like, how could I do that again? And I think sometimes there have been times where I've gotten discouraged enough by my writing and like how it's done that I've stopped. So like in university, when I was 18, I finished writing my first book. I queried like 4 agents and nobody responded to me. And that was really discouraging and crushing. And I just like stopped writing. I also didn't have time to write. But that like contributed, and so I didn't write for a while. And when I did write, I was writing adult literary short fiction because I was in like university creative writing classes, and that's kind of what I felt I should be writing in those. And then I didn't really want to write novels during that time, again because I didn't have time, but also because that first novel writing attempt had gone so poorly for me. So I guess in that way it was about that, but it was less about like me hating my writing and more just me feeling rejected, and then the feeling rejected making it discouraging and difficult to like jump back into that. So I think that's like the closest I've come to that. Why are you so awesome? But actually, how do you keep your secrets, i.e. book deal? Any tips? So keeping the book deal a secret is really because like you have to keep it a secret. So to me, I'm a big rules follower. Like I just follow the rules. And so it's like you're not supposed to publicly announce your book deal until you've signed the contract and it's time to announce. But the secret, the well-kept secret in publishing, is that you can sneaky tell people. Like, you could tell people, like, you tell in private, like, a couple, like, CPs or, like, a couple people, and you're like, obviously this is a secret, don't blab to people. Or, like, you can tell your partner and, like, your family and be like, but don't post it on Facebook. So, like, you're not supposed to tell publicly, but you can tell people. Basically, just like be careful of who you are telling, because if they go and blab off in a public forum and like leak your deal, then that's gonna come back to you, and like that's shitty. So like, be very careful. Don't tell everybody, obviously, but like you could sneaky tell a couple people. And that's really what makes all of the publishing secrets bearable, is that you can sneaky tell a couple people about it. You just can't announce it publicly. So that's the secret. Can you talk about how you know whether to keep working on a book or when to shelve it? So my personal how I decide when to keep working on a book or shelve it is my level of frustration. So if I have gotten to the point where I just like hate a project, I'll shelve it because I'm just like, I hate this. But often it's like I've gotten to a point of no return with it. So my second book, which was problematic, but anyway, before I was like gung-ho on realizing it was problematic, I shelved it because I had queried 60 agents and because I was tired of querying. I was tired of getting full requests and knowing that they would ultimately reject it, which like there's no way to know, but I felt that I knew they would ultimately reject it. I remember a big agent had requested the full and I didn't even get excited because I was like, they're gonna reject it, and they did. So but yeah, I'd gotten to this point of frustration where I just like was so demoralized. I didn't want to work on it. I didn't want to send it to more people. I didn't want to do anything with it. So I shelved it. Sometimes, and that's a big thing of why I shelved books. My middle grade book, I shelved it because I just like, I had gotten to that point. I didn't want to work on it. I didn't want to keep revising it. I just like couldn't see any way forward with it. And I was frustrated and I was just like, I'm done. And I like shelved it and I emailed my agent and I was like, I'm not working on it anymore. And then that was just it. And so for me, like that's the big thing of like shelving a project, like when you don't have any more passion for it or when you have exhausted it. So when you have like queried 100, like if you're querying in young adult and you've queried 100 agents, like those are all the agents basically at that point, like all the good ones. Even like I personally would say like 50 is really like the max out point. I wouldn't even get to 100, but like yeah, kind of when you've exhausted all of that is pretty much when I would say like for me like that's the time to shelve a project. And I think that's common for a lot of people. So yeah, losing passion, exhausting all your avenues is essentially like the two things that I would say. What are some themes that always appear in your work? So for me, messy black girls in fantasy situations is like, that's my brand. I like that. I stick with that. I would even just say just messy black girls, period. Like that will show up in my work all the time because I think that's fun. And also like family drama is a big thing that I just like, I always love. And I love that when I like watch stuff too. Like there's a reason The Haunting of Hill House is like one of my favorite TV shows ever. It's just the level of family drama in it. I just love that. I love those dynamics of like the people that you are forced to live with because they're your family. That's like a big theme that just like always kind of comes up in my work. Yeah, those two are the big ones. Do you plan to make a Facebook group for your readers? I didn't know this was a thing people did, but no. And the reason for that is I just like don't want to. It's just like a bandwidth thing for me. Like I only do things for my books and like author stuff that I want to do. And to me, like the combination of YouTube and Instagram and Twitter is like more than enough of stuff and of myself and my books for me to give for readers to interact with. And so I don't feel the need to create anything more to enhance that. This is kind of like the base level of the stuff that I want to do and I'm excited to do and like am happy to share with people. What are your favorite YouTube videos to make? This is kind of a hard one. You know what I really like? I really do like the story time videos. I've only done 2. I'll put the little playlist over here, the playlist with all of 2 videos. But I did 2. I did that time I wrote a problematic book and I did that time I cried over Pitch Wars. I like these videos because I like being able to candidly share an experience that I have had, like coming up in the writing community and coming up as an author, especially because like oftentimes I feel like those experiences are ones that other people have had, and like when I was in that experience I felt very alone and isolated in that experience, and like I was the only person going through that, even though I knew objectively that that's ridiculous and I'm probably not. And so being able to share those stories feels like sharing a resource that I wish that I could have had when I was in that moment. And so I like doing those videos because it just kind of gives me an avenue to like very narrowly, with like a narrow theme, be like, yeah, this is something that I experienced, and like this is what I learned from it, etc. I am trying to think of more of those topics. I'll have to think of some more as they come up. And I also like, I only did one video like this over here, but the creative author chat where I like did some journaling and just kind of casually chatted, I thought that was fun as well. So yeah, I really like that too. That was harder to film because of the overhead setup, but that was still really fun. First book process versus second. I'm not sure if they mean like writing, like if they mean like writing my very first book I ever wrote and writing the second book I wrote, or if they mean like writing my first published book and then my second on contract book, or if they mean like versus writing Blood Like Magic, which is my first contract book deal, and Butcher Birds, which is my second contract book deal. I'm not sure what they mean. So I will go through just all of those. So the difference between writing the very first book I ever wrote and writing the second book I wrote. The big difference for me between those was guidance and direction. So when I wrote my very first book, I was in a writing club at school, but it wasn't like we were focusing on novel writing. We were just like reading out short stories. And so I really like had zero direction. I did very bad research. I had like no idea what I was doing. Whereas in my second book, I was involved in the writing community at that point, and I felt like I had so much more guidance in what I was doing, and like so many more resources, because I was following other writers that were like ahead in the process or along with the process in me, that like shared a lot of resources. And so I learned about a lot of things that I didn't really know about before. The difference between writing my first contracted book and my second contracted book, so Blood Like Magic and the sequel, was, yeah, the difficulty of writing a sequel, but it's also like a very different process. So when I wrote Blood Like Magic, I didn't have an agent at all. So I was just kind of like writing on my own, doing my own thing. I was finding CPs and betas, and it was a much longer process because I went through my own edit. I did a self-edit. I had 2 rounds of CP and beta feedback. Then I got into RevPit, and then I had an editor reading, and then we did 2 rounds of edits, and then I queried, and then I got my agent, and then we started doing the agent rounds. Versus for the sequel, the process has been faster because I'm on deadline, but also it has just like been faster because now I have like a really tried and true process. So I write it, I do 1 self-edit, I give to CPs and betas, they give me feedback, I do 1 more edit, then I give to my agent, and then my agent does an edit. In this case, it was a little bit of a different process because my agent was only able, like just the way the deadline was, they could only do 1 pass, and so I did their edits at the same time I did CP and beta edits, and then I sent it to my editor. So that was a bit of a different process. And then the process between like Blood Like Magic and like Butcher Birds, so Butcher Birds was also like a not contract book when I wrote it, obviously. And it wasn't an option or anything. And so I just wrote it on my own. And so actually writing Butcher Birds was a lot more aligned to my process for my first book, because I just kind of drafted it. And then I sent it to CPs and betas, though we only did 1 round of that. And then I gave it to my agent, and then me and my agent did like 4 or 5 rounds of edits on it, and then it went to submission. And so it's interesting because that book, the writing process felt a lot more aligned to the Blood Like Magic process. The only difference being that now I already had the agent, so I didn't have to like do more excessive edits before that. I just like did my CP edits and then I handed it over to her. So the commonalities with all of those basically is I always do like, yeah, CPs and betas are invaluable, and I always do edits with them because it makes such a huge difference. I'm writing a middle grade with a magic school setting. How can I make it unique? I don't write middle grade, and so I'm not like a middle grade expert. I think if you are having trouble thinking about how to set your book apart from whatever is already out there, something that I always do when I'm trying to do that is to read as much as what is out there as possible, because having that knowledge of what exists can help you decide how you're going to set yourself apart from that. And so I do that in general, especially like when I am doing projects that I know feature tropes that have been done a lot. I will consume a lot of that content to see how I can set myself apart, which is something that I did for Butcher Birds, because there's so many haunted house stories. Like haunted house horror is like, so many people do haunted house horror. And so even though I hadn't read anything like while I was writing my book, while I was writing the first draft, after I'd written it, I had read a bunch and I'd kind of been like, okay. But when I was like watching haunted house movies, which I did watch a bunch of, I thought about what was going to make mine different and what I could put in that could set it apart from what I already knew in the canon. So that's kind of what I recommend in general if you are trying to find a way to stand out from what is out there. Can you share your favorite part of Blood Like Magic, maybe a scene? So I can't share the whole thing, but I can read one or like a little bit of a line from it. It's not a spoiler because this is said basically on the back flap of the book. But if you don't even want to know what it says on the flap of the book, you can skip this reading bit. So for context, the person named Mama is Mama Jova. It's my main character Voya's ancestor. So that's who is talking. Okay. Mama returns to staring at David. Her hands are fisted at her sides. I called, but you won't answer. You have learned nothing here today. That's why you fail. So. So that's why I say it's, oh my god. Anyway, I dropped it. That's why I say it's not a spoiler, because it says on the back flap that she fails. So anyway, that's like my favorite part of the book, I think. Not because it's like the favorite, like a fun part of the book. It's actually like the most, well, not the most. It's one of the most traumatizing parts of the book. And I do have a trigger warning for that, which is like whipping in the context of slavery. And so that's a memory that her ancestor is showing to her. But what I like about it is that her ancestor is really trying to teach her something. And she's trying to show her her history, and she's trying to explain why, she's essentially trying to explain why she has chosen Voya for this, and she's trying to talk to her about it, but like Voya, my main character, is just so traumatized by seeing in real life something she's really only known about her ancestor from like books and from their family history, because it's so one thing to know what your ancestors have gone through, and it's so another thing to watch that happen, and that's so viscerally traumatizing for my main character that she can't pay attention to anything her ancestor is saying, and it's just that thing to me of like having your ancestor, like having that person right there, and they're trying to connect with you, but your experiences as people, as like Black women, is so different, even though it's so different on surface, that my main character can't even comprehend what's being told to her, even though her ancestor is trying to help her see the connection between their life experiences, even if they are so very different. And so that's what I like about the scene. I like that clash. And I think a lot of this book in general is about like, how might your life be different if you had the sort of insight that your ancestors could give you and you had access to that history and those people, and like how would things be different? And that's an interesting moment for me, because it's like my main character Voya at her fingertips has access to so much, but the level of trauma is also so much that she can't even get there. She has to get over that hurdle first to even be able to pull something out of it. And so that's why I really like it. But it's like, it's not like a fun scene. Exactly. It's like a very like, it's not a fun scene, but it's my favorite for that reason, or one of my favorites. I don't know, it's hard to like say what's a favorite. I think really my actual favorite scene is like a big spoiler, and so I can't actually say it, but this is a scene that I really liked, that I put in, and that I really appreciated for the overall themes of the story. I think I also appreciate it because I think it rejects kind of the idea of trauma porn. And I think there are lots of like films and that sort of thing that are made not necessarily with like the thought or well-being of Black people in mind, that will use scenes like that as torture porn. It's not saying anything, there's no purpose to it, it's just to be traumatizing. And that's something I've worked really hard not to do with this scene. It is not there just to be traumatizing, it is there to really push a point and to really create a discussion around ancestry and connections to your ancestors and having access to that, and also the difficulty of interacting with a difficult history. So yeah, I talked a lot about that. And those are all the questions. Thank you so much for sending in questions. I'm always like low-key nervous that I'll get like none. And thank you so much for subscribing. Thank you so much for 3,000 subscribers. That's like awesome. I'm really happy about that. Never should I ever. I remember like being so pumped when I had 100 subscribers. Like I was like, yeah, like I was really excited about that. And to now be at 3,000 is like wild. So thank you so much for all of your support. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. And thank you so much for watching. Bye.